Alright, my friends, let me show you how this character can completely shut down entire encounters instantly by debuffing enemies to the point of uselessness. I've gone ahead and cast Spirit Guardians before starting this fight, and then we're just going to run up into the middle of this group of enemies, applying a ton of Radiating Orbs to all of them, as well as Reverberation. We'll then just back off just a little bit here, and we'll cast our Dazzling Breath. This only takes a bonus action, so we're going to hit the 4 most dangerous enemies. Obviously, we want to include the Steel Watchers in this attack, so we'll go ahead and get those. I'm not going to use any abilities from my other characters as well, so you can see that we've stacked 10 Radiating Orbs on everything that we've hit with just those 2 effects, and that's before we've even used our action. With that action, we're going to go ahead and cast Destructive Wave, and we'll do, of course, Radiant Destructive Wave. Note that that hits only enemies, not our allies as well. Once again, we're going to pass on Cutting Words, and you can see that every enemy in the encounter is either dead or knocked prone, and except for the Steel Watchers, which are immune. And those have huge numbers of stacks of penalties on them, so that when we pass our turn to them, they're simply going to miss their attacks no matter what. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering one of the most powerful builds that Patch 8 made possible, which I'm calling the Radiant Star. I was actually really surprised I hadn't covered this build yet, because this is one of the most effective builds from Patch 8. This character provides phenomenal debuffing, to the point where, in many encounters, the enemies will simply pass their turns completely, rather than embarrass themselves trying to attack. We're the best character in the game at using Radiating Orbs, which of course is one of the most powerful mechanics in Baldur's Gate 3, and all of the attendant debuffs that we can add on top of those. On top of the incredible debuffing, we also get great offensive spellcasting, with excellent damage and incredible crowd control, as well as phenomenal healing, utility, and defenses for your team, and this character itself is almost impossible to take down, even before you consider just how debuffed the enemies will be, which makes this one of the easiest characters to carry an honor mode run with. And in fact, I discovered that I hadn't done a full guide for it because I wanted it as the centerpiece for an upcoming full party build. So you can keep an eye out for that to see this as the mainstay of an entire team. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Tarantula for the $5 donation, Andrew Hilscher for the $20, and My Secret Avatar for the incredibly generous $100 donation, as well as Alito123able, Courtney, and Satirica Gmail for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I know I'm incredibly far behind at saying thank you, but I really do appreciate all of your support. It really means so much to me. Alright, let's take over the game. I'm using Shadowheart as the example character here because this is a Cleric build, and she is, of course, the Cleric of the party, but I also think that this build makes a ton of sense from a lore perspective for a good aligned Shadowheart. If you want to play a good run with Shadowheart, either as an origin character or as part of your party, this build makes a ton of sense both with her backstory and with the events that take place throughout the game, so I think it makes a lot of sense from a lore perspective, as well as being ridiculously powerful. If you're building this as a custom character, then I recommend Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed. Move speed is going to be one of the most important stats for this character because it will let us apply our brutal debuffs to even more enemies and damage more enemies. We'll already have additional move speed from Longstrider, so doubling up on that bonus will let us affect the entire encounter all at once. Other great picks include the normal standouts like Gnome or Halfling, though I will say that Halfling is less critical for this character than for other spellcasters because we already can't roll a 1 on concentration, so Halfling's ability to reroll 1's still great, but doesn't matter as much for this character as it does for others. Although this is primarily a Cleric build, we're going to be starting with a level of Druid. This lets us get our very powerful Star Druid abilities online as quickly as possible, and gets us a ton of great utility spells. But it also fits our goal of being as strong an honor mode character as we can be, because the first 2 levels of Druid are incredibly powerful in the early game, so this is going to make even the earliest possible iteration of the character as risk-free as it can possibly be by overpowering the early game significantly. For our cantrip selection as a druid, we're going to be taking Shillelagh and Thornwhip. Shillelagh is part of why druids are so good in the early game. You can cast this on a torch, and you get a weapon that does a d8 plus a d4 of damage right away, based on your wisdom to attack, and so you have a very powerful early game weapon, stronger even than barbarians or fighters. And we're taking Thorn Whip because it's a great utility cantrip that will be relevant all game. Repositioning enemies is always powerful. Normally you would take Guidance here, but because we're going to be playing a Star Druid, we'll get Guidance for free at level 2. If you really want Guidance for skill checks on the Nautiloid, you can take it instead of Thorn Whip and then respec once you have reached Withers in order to swap it out for Thorn Whip. If you're playing as origin character Shadowheart, or if you are a high elf or high half elf, you can be even stronger in the early game by adding Booming Blade as your wizard cantrip, which gives you an even more powerful melee attack when enemies move. For our ability score selection here, we're going to be taking the greediest possible attribute split on this character. So we're going to go with 16 starting dexterity, 15 starting constitution, and 17 starting wisdom, and then of course we'll even out these odd numbers with our first ability score improvement. You can, of course, start with 16, 16, 14, and 12 in strength if you want a little extra jump distance in the early game. That mostly won't matter, so I'm just going to go with the odd numbers here, but if you want to squeeze out every speck of optimization, then that's something you can definitely do. Our skill selection mostly won't matter here, but of course, as a druid, we get access to perception, and we're a wisdom-based character with perception, so we're going to be our party's best bet to make perception checks. So we can take that alongside survival just to save you some clicks of randomly digging around looking for chests. You can also build this as a face character, as I mentioned previously, in which case you would want to take 12 in charisma, and then you can take some skill proficiencies, either from your background or from your race in the charisma skills, and that'll make this character pretty good at dialogue skills if you're playing it as a main character. Other than that, we don't have to make any decisions at Druid level 1, so let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're taking our second level of Druid, and this, of course, lets us choose our Druid subclass. We're going to take the Circle of the Stars, for a number of reasons, but in particular because this is the best way to apply Radiating Orbs in the game. Very early in the game, you'll get access to the Luminous Armor, and then you'll get other ways to apply Radiating Orbs, and those debuff enemy attack rolls when you do radiant damage to enemies. Because the Circle of the Stars Druid, with their starry forms, can do radiant damage as a bonus action, either at long range with the Archer form, or in an AoE with the Dragon form, this character will be able to apply that debuff to huge numbers of enemies. Alongside our Cleric spells and class abilities, we're going to be able to absolutely coat the enemies in debuffs, and they will simply not be able to attack or hit our characters effectively. We also, of course, as a Star Druid, get a number of other bonuses. We get Guidance as a cantrip. We're always going to want this, so getting it for free is great. We get Guiding Bolt as a spell known, which is really good. This character is built around doing radiant damage, so Guiding Bolt as both a great direct damage spell to complement our already high direct damage from being a Star Druid or from making weapon attacks with Shillelagh is an awesome spell to have. And we get free casts of Guiding Bolt from star maps, which give us even more access to this quite powerful early game spell. Guiding Bolt isn't always worth spending a full spell slot on, but when you get it for free, it's a really powerful spell early on. Also, although we're a Star Druid and are going to be spending most of our time in these starry forms, typically you're going to be in Archer form if you want to stay at a distance, but Dragon form is a good default in the early game. You can also do some healing in Chalice form if you prefer that or if your party needs it, especially before your full Radiating Orb setup is online, but Dragon is just going to be a good default because the AoE Dazzling Breath is just so powerful. You also do have access to your actual wild shape form, so you can spam infinite webs with Spider, or use these to traverse areas, or of course disguise yourself as a cat. So don't forget that you have those, even though you're mostly using your wild shapes for starry form. We also, of course, need to prepare spells, and we're going to prepare most of the good Druid spells that are not available to Clerics. So we're going to go ahead and pick up Enhanced Sleep and Longstrider, two of the most important utility ritual spells. These don't cost a spell slot when used outside of combat because they're rituals. So this will give our whole party dramatically increased mobility just for having these spells available. We'll also grab Fog Cloud, and we'll take Entangle and Ice Knife. These are all spells that Druid gets that Cleric doesn't, and so they're really nice additions. Having Entangle for an AoE control spell also is really good in the early game. Concentrating on this while doing our just normal weapon attacks with Shillelagh or using our bonus actions and Guiding Bolts is a very powerful strategy in early game encounters. At character level 3, we've gotten what we want from Druid, so it's time to start taking levels of Cleric. We're going to multi-class into Cleric, and for our subclass, we're going to be taking Light Domain. Not only is this overall probably the strongest domain with a great domain spell list and a really powerful ability, it also, of course, synergizes with our goal of applying Radiating Orb debuffs because of the radiant damage that Light Domain is great at doing. And Warding Flare works really well with reducing enemy attack rolls. When you have an enemy that has a reduced attack roll and disadvantage, often the only way they could hit you is with a critical hit, and disadvantage makes that significantly less likely to happen. So many enemies are going to go from a 1 in 20 chance of hitting you to a 1 in 400 chance of hitting you if you use Warding Flare against their attacks. We also get 3 Cleric cantrips, and we have some Druid ones already. So for our Cleric cantrips, we're going to pick up Sacred Flame. This is a great way to apply radiant damage that doesn't cost a resource, so of course we want it available. We're going to take Toll the Dead just because it's a pretty solid ranged damage cantrip, and having another ranged damage option is great. It's a little higher damage than Sacred Flame. You also don't need Toll the Dead if you already have the Luminous armor at this point, so you may not want to pick it up and just use Sacred Flame instead, but I like having both just to have the option. And then finally, we're going to take Resistance. Having Guidance and Resistance helps you with a lot of non-combat events, so this character continues to apply a ton of utility to the party. We also, thanks to a bug that still exists at time of recording, when you multi-class into Cleric, you get 2 additional skills, so you can pick up 2 more skill proficiencies here. And we get to prepare some Cleric spells. Obviously, we don't need Guiding Bolt, because we already have that from Star Druid, but we're going to go ahead and pick up Healing Word, Bless, Command, and Sanctuary. These are typically the most important Cleric spells in the early game, though we'll swap in Create Water as well. And this gives us just a laundry list of the best early game spells. We can protect our party, we can shut down enemies, we can buff everyone, and we can do it all while outputting great damage turn over turn. So already at this point in the game, the character is way above the power curve. At character level 4, we're taking our second level of Light Cleric, which of course gives us Radiance of the Dawn. This is yet another AoE damage, radiant damage ability. Doesn't even require a spell slot, it's just once per short rest. So between this and Dazzling Breath, you can hit an entire encounter with radiant damage twice over, already at this level, without spending a single spell slot. Of course, if you do want to spend spells, you have Guiding Bolts and everything, so you have even more opportunity to provide these debuffs. Early in the game, you get access to the Luminous armor, so you're already getting the debuffs, and then you'll just get even more, as well as Reverberation and other debuff effects as the game continues, so enemies will just not be able to fight back at this point. For our prepared spells, we can add in Inflict Wounds will sometimes be up against enemies, so Inflict Wounds is a nice option to have in that case. And remember, every action that this character is taking, you can follow it up with bonus action additional damage from Star Druid. At character level 5, we're taking our third level of Cleric, unlocking second level Cleric spells, as well, of course, as third level spell slots, because we have 5 full caster levels. At this level, we get to add in a bunch of great control spells as a Cleric, so we're going to put in Hold Person, and we'll add in Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon is usually going to do incredible work on this character, because enemies will so frequently be debuffed completely that they will often attack the Spiritual Weapon, thanks to its low AC, and miss, and it has a bunch of resistances, so it will distract enemy attacks pretty reliably. This character is also pretty good at using Warding Bond to protect allies, or you can use a third level spell slot to cast Aid. Because we are a 5th level character with only 3 Cleric levels, upcasting Aid is a great use of our level 3 spell slots as well. One other thing that is worth noting is that if you want to slightly optimize the level order by respeccing multiple times during your playthrough, you can respec here to be a 5th level Cleric to get Spirit Guardians right away, and then meet back up with the build by taking 2 more Druid levels. I'm not going to show that respec here because it's not necessary, but it does make you slightly stronger at level 5 specifically to have 5 Cleric levels. So that's something that you can do if you're really concerned about your strength at level 5. At level 6, we're taking our 4th Cleric level and getting another cantrip, where we're going to take Blade Ward. This character will often be up in the mix. Of course, we're going to be a Spirit Guardians caster running around, and our Dazzling Breath is short-ranged as well. So we'll often be pretty close to enemies. Having Blade Ward as something that we can use an action on to gain 2 turns of resistance, and then still use a bonus action from Star Druid is pretty powerful. It just gives us a bunch of additional options for defending ourselves, and it means that incoming damage will often be incredibly low, thanks to the concentration effect that we get from being in dragon form, where we can't roll less than a 10 on our concentration. If you're blade warded, enemy attacks will almost never do enough damage to break your concentration, so this character will basically never actually lose concentration on a spell, even if an enemy manages to hit you, which is pretty unlikely. For our feat here, we're just going to take an ability improvement and even out our scores. So we're going to go up to 16 Constitution for more hit points and even more concentration, and 18 Wisdom. If you are using Ethel's Hair on this character as well, you can start with 17 Wisdom and boost it to 18, and then you can fit in Alert. We'll be using some initiative gear because this character normally doesn't get Alert, and you still want to go first, of course, in combat. But if you're using Ethel's Hair, then you can take Alert instead of the ASI here, because you'll still hit 18 Wisdom. At character level 7, we're taking our 5th level of Cleric, which of course will unlock Spirit Guardians. Also, as a light Cleric, we get access to Fireball, which is a pretty nice non-concentration AoE damage spell. You're usually going to be using Glyph of Warding instead, but Fireball still definitely has its place, especially when you don't have to spend a prepared spell slot on it. Glyph of Warding will give you more control, Fireball will often give you more damage, so it depends on which you need for the encounter. Of course, for our prepared spells, a key for this character is we want to do as much radiant damage as possible, so we're going to be taking Spirit Guardians, and this will be passively damaging enemies as we run past them, while we're also actively casting our action-based abilities and bonus actions. In addition to that, we'll pick up Glyph of Warding here, and then for our last spell prepared slot, you can throw in Aid here, which is of course great to spend a level 3 spell slot on. At this point, you're usually going to spend your level 4s on Spirit Guardians, and your level 3s on Aid to buff up your party's HP significantly, while also keeping your highest level spell slots for your main combat spell. Any leftover level 3 spell slots you can spend on Fireball or Glyph of Warding, or you can use your lower level spell slots for control and damaging effects, while your high level ones do all the heavy lifting. Then, at Light Cleric level 6, we get improved Warding Flare, making us even better at defending our team. Not only will, at this point, you'll likely have the other Radiating Orb items, or at least one more of them, so enemies will almost always have 8 to 10 stacks of Radiating Orb, taking a minus 10 penalty on their attack rolls, and missing all your allies significantly. If you're worried about an attack, you can now use your reaction to protect them with improved Warding Flare as well. So enemy physical attackers or anything that attacks your armor class is basically not a concern for any party that has this character in it. At level 9, we're getting our 7th level of Cleric, and this gives us 2 more great spells from Light Cleric. We get Guardian of Faith, which of course Clerics would normally get, and also Wall of Fire. There's a lot of encounters that Wall of Fire can just solo, and some of those encounters are against enemies that our normal plan of radiant damage isn't great against. So Wall of Fire is pretty good to have as a backup option for this character. One of the nice things about this character is that you can still at this point wade into melee with a staff with Shillelagh, if you're desperate, and still do pretty good damage with that. You can also have lots of different damage types available between Glyph of Warding letting you choose multiple damage types and Radiant Clerics, or Light Cleric's access to fire damage spells. You just have a lot of different tools, so even if there's a fight where your plan A is bad, for whatever reason. And it's almost never actively bad, but there are some where it's less powerful. You have a great plan B, you have a great plan C, and even if you want to get all the way to plan E or F, you can still just buff your party members with all of your great buffing spells, because you're still a cleric. In addition to that, we get some extra prepared spells that we can pick up here. So our spell prepared list is going to look something like this at this point. I'm going to throw in Banishment as well, because Banishment is really nice in certain encounters against enemies with really low charisma saves. So again, just gives you a way to solve some encounters outright. And Freedom of Movement makes a nice panic button. If an ally gets stunned, you can break them out of it with Freedom of Movement. Don't spend a spell slot on this at the beginning of the day usually, but breaking an ally out of a stun is a great use for this character's action, especially because our bonus actions are so good, so we can still do more stuff with the rest of our turn. We're also at this point very unlikely to cast Inflict Wounds frequently, so you can work in another healing spell like Mass Healing Word, which would give you even more ability to heal. This character can mix the buff on heal items in alongside your Radiating Orb items at various points in the game, so you can also provide a bunch of buffs to your allies while still debuffing your enemies massively. At character level 10, we get our second feat, as well as Potent Spellcasting, and Potent Spellcasting is actually really strong for this character as well. Casting Sacred Flame on this character when you have all the debuffs that apply alongside Sacred Flame is a pretty powerful use of your turn and costs you nothing to do. So Potent Spellcasting just gives you a relevant increase to your damage on pretty large numbers of turns, lets you take much longer adventuring days because you don't have to spend actual spell slots on killing things. And this character also, because of our Starbolts from Guiding Map, because of our Star Druid abilities, is good at taking long adventuring days, which is a normal weakness of Cleric, is that they can sometimes run out of spells and things to do. This character is much better at going for longer without running out of things to do, so even if you don't like to long rest that frequently, still a very powerful choice. And Potent Spellcasting, of course, plays into that. We also get an additional feat, and we're just going to take an ability score improvement to max out our wisdom. If you took Ethel's Hair and took Alert as well, then you'll still just be maxing out your wisdom at this point. No need for anything like Warcaster or anything like that. This character will never drop concentration anyways. Just make your wisdom as high as possible so your spells work as frequently as they can and do as much damage as possible. There is actually one other feat, though, that's worth mentioning, if you want something that's slightly more offbeat. Taking Spell Sniper and picking up Eldritch Blast as your cantrip node will let you apply even more Radiating Orbs with a cantrip, because this fires 3 beams, and each individual beam can debuff enemies, either spread apart or multiple on the same enemy. So Spell Sniper for Eldritch Blast is actually a reasonable choice on this character as well. I certainly wouldn't normally take it over the ASI for +2 wisdom, but if you're using initiative gear and Ethel's Hair, so you already have plenty of initiative and 20 wisdom, then Spell Sniper is a pretty nice one. Or you can just take it if you just want a fun feat to add to an extremely powerful build that honestly doesn't really need to take optimal feats in the late game, because you're already going to be so ridiculously strong. For this build, though, we'll be taking an ASI and going on to level 11, where we get our 9th level of Cleric, which not only gives us 6th level spell slots, so we can cast a maximum strength Spirit Guardians. Typically, you're going to use your 6th level spell with this character on Spirit Guardians, because it just wins encounters, and the higher a level it is, the more damage it does. But we also get Destructive Wave. This is a spell that's unique to Light and Tempest Clerics, and is incredible, not only just in general, but especially for this character. It's non-concentration, it doesn't hit your allies, and it's a giant AoE around your character, which is always going to be in the middle of groups of enemies. And it does radiant damage, so it's, again, going to apply a lot of the debuffs. Knocking enemies prone also works really, really well with a lot of our other tools. So Destructive Wave is going to be a great use of our spell slots when we want to cast something that doesn't take concentration in a fight. In addition to that, for our prepared spells, there aren't that many 5th level spells that we're likely to cast that frequently from Cleric. If you're casting a concentration spell, it's usually not going to be Insect Plague, it's going to be a buff, or obviously Spirit Guardians, or for a debuff, you're more likely to cast something like Hold Person. But There are still some nice spells that we can add in that give us some extra utility from earlier levels. So we can, of course, pick up Warding Bond if you have a squishy ally. This character will very rarely take damage, usually. So Warding Bond is actually pretty good on this character. Just normally, you don't have to be a camp caster to use this spell. Enhance ability, of course, can help us with any skill checks that we might be worried about passing, and you can just pick up another utility spell. This character can also use stuff like Animate Dead to give you some extra summons for even more combat prowess available in your party. And the summons, unlike for most characters, where the skeleton archers, for example, will die in one attack to enemies, will very rarely die when this character is on their side, because enemies' attack rolls will not be able to hit even their truly horrific AC. Finally, at character level 12, we actually have a couple options. Cleric level 10 is totally fine, or you can take Druid level 3 if you want a couple more Druid spells. Moonbeam plus Sanctuary is a very powerful combo even this late in the game. Spike Growth is still relevant even later on as well, so a 3rd level of Druid is totally reasonable. A 10th level of Cleric for an additional cantrip, and for Divine Intervention is also pretty reasonable. We can also multi-class again. You can respec and take Sorcerer at level 1, and then follow the rest of this build all the way through. That gets you con save proficiency, as well as from Storm Sorcery, Tempestuous Magic, which gives you even more mobility in the late game. For this build, I'm just going to go ahead and take the 10th level of Cleric, just to get Divine Intervention, because it's a pretty nice weapon for us if you use the weapon thing, and to max out on Cleric, but there are a lot of options for the last level, so I encourage you to experiment with what you want to do with the 12th level for this character. For our cantrip here, we're just going to go ahead and pick up Bursting Sinew, because it's fun and hilarious to explode corpses, and then that is it. So hopefully this has been a helpful guide to the Radiant Star, and it'll help you just flatten honor mode. But of course, this character uses certain items incredibly well, and is built around some of the items that exist in the game. So let's talk about those and the other items that will power us up even further. For items for this character's itemization is pretty set, although there is still room for some customization. But there are specific items that we're definitely going to be looking for. Not only are they the best items for this character, but this character is the best character in the game to use them. So if you're bringing this character in your party, these items will almost always go to them. This, in particular, is the Radiating Orb item setup. You've seen this probably on many builds before, but we're going to be using the Callous Glow Ring to make all of our effects do an extra 2 radiant damage. It's not listed in the tooltip, but the damage type on this is radiant. Remember that we have Light as a cantrip known from Light Cleric, so enemies can always be illuminated if we cast Light on ourselves at the beginning of every day. We also are going to be using the Coruscation Ring. This will apply Radiating Orb, which stacks up to 10 times, and for every stack reduces enemy attack rolls by 1, and also will then illuminate them even further for the Callous Glow Ring, whenever we deal spell damage. Now, this spell damage doesn't count Spirit Guardians, so the passive damage that we're going to be doing from Spirit Guardians won't proc this, but it does count the effect like Luminous Arrow or Dazzling Breath from Star Druid. So we're going to be proccing the Coruscation Ring even more than a Light Cleric normally would, because Star Druid adds those effects as well. We'll also be using the Luminous Armor. This does a Radiant Shockwave, which basically just inflicts Radiating Orb 2 turns, it doesn't say this in the tooltip again, in a 10-foot radius whenever we deal radiant damage. So again, constantly applying this. And the Boots of Stormy Clamor, when we inflict a condition, which again we're doing constantly, will also inflict Reverberation, which reduces enemy stats and enemy saving throws, and when it hits 5, they have a chance to be knocked prone. The save on this is going to be pretty high, and they'll have penalties to it, so enemies will very often just be knocked prone just by this character walking near them. In addition to that, we're using the Gloves of Belligerent Skies for even more stacks of Reverberation. One swap that you can make if you want more Radiating Orb and less Reverberation, or if another character needs the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, is you can use the Luminous Gloves instead. Generally, I like these 5 items on this character because you get to stack both of these stacking debuffs to their maximum incredibly quickly, but that is an exchange that you can make if you want to. Those items together are almost always going to appear on this character, though I have included a couple alternatives if another party member needs them. For our weapon for this character, we actually don't need a specific weapon, so there's a couple options that we can use. We can carry a utility weapon, but there's some that are pretty good for us. I've divided them here into early game and late game weapons. So in the early game, my favorite weapon for this character is Nature's Snare. Because we're often going to be attacking with Shillelagh, so we're going to be actually hitting enemies in melee, this can ensnare enemies, and an enemy who's ensnared has disadvantage on their attack rolls, and they're going to be taking penalties because we're going to be debuffing them with radiating orbs, etc. So that enemy will be unable to move and unable to hit because we're applying all this disadvantage. So Nature's Snare is actually really fun. If you have other spell attackers in your party, or if you're finding that you spend most of your time in archer form and are firing the luminous arrows, which make attack rolls, then the Staff of Arcane Blessing is really nice. It doubles the bonus of Bless to your attack rolls on spell attacks. So if you have a warlock in your party, or if you're in archer form constantly, then the Staff of Arcane Blessing is very, very powerful as well. You can also use the Spell Sparkler. This is just going to give you a lot of lightning charges for more damage in the early game. Also a totally reasonable setup. Later on, a couple items that are worth looking out for this character. Markaheshkir, of course, is the best staff for pretty much any caster, and this is no exception. Obviously, Markaheshkir is just going to increase your spell save DCs, give you refreshes on your very powerful high-level spell slots, and also give you extra casts of really strong spells for the late game. You'll usually just want to be in lightning form for Markaheshkir here for the short rest chain lightning for direct burst damage. That overcomes one of this character's disadvantages, is that our damage is mostly dealt slowly over time, rather than in huge bursts. So having chain lightning can alleviate that very small problem with the character, which really doesn't come up because enemies getting turns doesn't matter when you have this character because they won't be able to do anything with those turns anyways. Solune's Spear of Night is, of course, a very flavorful option and also pretty strong for this character. The Moonmote ability is really nice because they're going to treat it as difficult terrain, and all your allies are going to be doing extra radiant damage to those enemies. So Moonmote is just very powerful. The lighted area being difficult terrain when you cast this spell slows enemies even further, and they're often going to be knocked prone, so it will prevent enemies from moving around. Another cool option is the Devotee's Mace for the healing aura. That can give you a more supporting role, and since your character doesn't need an offensive weapon, then carrying the Devotee's Mace, which as a level 10 cleric we just get, can be pretty nice for buffing our allies. But usually you're just going to end up with Markaheshkir in the late game on this character. Next, I mentioned that if we didn't take alert, we're going to want some initiative gear on this character. With only +3 initiative by default, we definitely want more than that. Having this character go first means that you're going to debuff enemies before they ever get to act, and so you always want this character to go before enemies. So putting some initiative gear on them is very important. The best ones for this is the Sentinel Shield, +3 initiative is awesome. You also get advantage on perception checks, which this character is proficient in and has high wisdom, so that's just a nice little bonus on top of the awesome +3 initiative that this shield gives you. And the Hellrider Longbow. That's usually what you're going to go with. If for some reason you really need the Sentinel Shield on another character, Heatheric's Shield can increase your spell save DC, and you can use the Fistbreaker Helm. +7 initiative is still okay in honor mode, though that's on the low end. Going up to +10 just guarantees that you're going to go before every enemy, including even the fastest enemies in the game, and so you're always going to be able to lock them down before they get to take a turn. So usually you'll go with the Sentinel Shield and the Hellrider Longbow, unless you took alert while you were leveling up. Speaking of alert, our amulet choice gives us another way to access that awesome feat, and that is Khalid's Gift. If we start with 17 Wisdom and use Khalid's Gift to go up to 18 Wisdom, we can still hit 20 and take Alert with only our 2 feats. And so this gives us a way to respec and grab Alert in the late game once we have this, even if we didn't take Ethel's Hair in order to hit the 20 Wisdom that this character wants to hit. Another option here, of course, is just the super powerful Amulet of the Devout, great for any spellcaster, and this one, of course, is no exception. Casting lockdown and control spells with this character is a great thing to do, and high save DC is definitely something that we want, so the Amulet of the Devout is great. We can also use the Amulet of Greater Health. That will make this character pretty much invincible to enemy attackers. They will almost never hit you. It will give you a ridiculous amount of HP, and it means that we are basically incapable of dropping concentration on spells, with advantage on con saves, 23 constitution, and the ability to never roll lower than a 10 on our concentration saves because of the dragon form of Star Druid. We just can't drop concentration on our Spirit Guardians, especially because enemies so rarely will actually manage to hit us. So that's a great option for even more safety. Another fun amulet option for this character, especially if you're finding that you spend a lot of your time in Archer form and are using Luminous Arrow, and if you're casting Guiding Bolt pretty frequently, which also uses a spell attack roll, is the Spine Shudder Amulet. This is especially good if you took Spell Sniper as a feat, as I mentioned while leveling up, and have Eldritch Blast, because the multiple rays of the Eldritch Blast will apply multiple stacks of reverberation with the Spine Shudder. If you are using a lot of spell attack rolls, then the Spine Shudder is very good and can stack up to 6 reverberation in a single spell cast with the boots and the gloves of Belligerent Skies, or let you sub in the Luminous Gloves for even more Radiating Orb stacking without giving up reverberation. But only do this if you're in Archer form a lot, and you'll usually be in Dragon form. For our helmet, I already mentioned the Fistbreaker Helm, which gives a save DC and initiative, or the Hood of the Weave for just even more spell save DC. Another fun option for this character is the Cold Brim Hat. When you inflict a condition, which we're doing constantly, it will also apply Encrusted with Frost on them. That gives them disadvantage on their dexterity saves, so if they're on an ice surface or something like that, they'll fall over. You won't stack Encrusted with Frost up to 7 with this character, but it's just even more conditions that you can apply to enemies, and more debuffs, having them fail their saves even more frequently is always really powerful, so a great option there as well. Finally, for our cloak, you can either go more offensive with the Cloak of the Weave, again, higher save DCs, exactly what this character needs, or the Cloak of Displacement makes a great defensive option for this character. It will mean that every attack against you has disadvantage, so they'll just never hit you, combined with the penalties that you're stacking up. And it lets you always use your Warding Flare on an ally, since attacks against you always have disadvantage. Finally, some alternatives. I've already mentioned the Luminous Gloves. If you need the Gloves of Belligerent Skies for another build, or if you are using the Spine Shudder Amulet. This character is also very good, especially in the early game, at using the Hellrider's Pride and the Whispering Promise. Chalice form of Star Druid gives you extra ways to apply these buffs, so you can apply Bless and Blade Ward with the buff on heal items. And if you don't have the Boots of Stormy Clamor, then the Boots of Striding mean that you can't be knocked prone, and that's the only way this character can lose concentration on spells. So you may want the Boots of Striding for certain encounters where you're likely to be knocked prone, if that's something that you're concerned about, or if you're not using the Boots of Stormy Clamor, these make a great alternative. But usually you're going to want to end up with the items that we've already discussed. Finally, my suggested endgame items for this character. You're going to want the Hood of the Weave for additional spell save DC, and the Cloak of the Weave for also more spell save DC, alongside the Luminous Armor, the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, and the Boots of Stormy Clamor, as well as the Callous Glow Ring and the Coruscation Ring for the full Radiating Orb and Reverberation setup. You're also going to add in the Amulet of the Devout for even more of a spell save DC bonus, and then Mark a Heshkir as well with 20 Wisdom. That gives you plus 11 to your save DCs from the 20 Wisdom, and then the plus 6 from your gear, plus of course your proficiency bonus. So enemies are very rarely going to succeed at saving throws against your spells, as well as not be able to attack. With the super high bonus, and of course you get all the benefits of having Marka Heshkir. We're going to round that out with the Sentinel Shield and the Hellrider Longbow, which gives us a total of plus 9 initiative, so we're almost always going to win initiative, and spend most of our time in Dragon form, which means that we'll never drop concentration on Spirit Guardians. So that's going to be your endgame setup for the character. You can obviously make some substitutions, but this is the most powerful itemization at the end of Act 3. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Radiant Star, and I hope that you have a lot of fun just completely shutting down encounters by debuffing them to the point of uselessness, and I hope it helps you get an honor mode win if you're looking to get one. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a comment and hit like. It helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides, a full party build featuring this character, which is part of why I am doing this guide right now, and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.